Do you also want to become crazy rich overnight and be able to afford a large house? Whenever one opens up for lottery, of course. All the expensive dye and glamour you could ever want. And be able to give to your friends that mount they always wanted and not even flinch. Every time there is a major patch, especially one with a new raid tier, this offers a bunch of opportunities to make a lot of gil. But there is one core problem with almost every single easy money-making strategy which involves trading with other players in any capacity at all. If you learned a trick from a video, especially one with a lot of views, it is safe to assume that everyone else also knows that. We will be going over 5 common get-rich-quick strategies that tend to gain more prominence right around patch day, and explain how they can work and how they, for a lot of players, ultimately don't work. So you have that extra leg up on everyone else to avoid the pitfalls, unless, of course, this video gets a lot of views, in which case, good luck. Also, if you have advice of your own to share on the subject, be sure to leave it in the comments. Now then, number 1. Materia Hoarding. The logical reasoning is that with a new patch, a lot of new gear is being added, and people will need new materia to put in their new gear. Whether this is combat materia, gathering materia, or crafting materia is not important. The process is similar. If materia is under a certain price tag, you simply buy up all of the popular materia you expect people to need in the upcoming patch. And then, on patch day, you put it all back on the market again at overprice, and because people need their materia for their new gear, they will pay. Right? Now, the first issue with this strategy, and why it tends to not work, is slightly different between combat jobs and non-combat jobs. For combat jobs, the vast majority of players get by with just 1 or 2 grade 10 materia in each gear slot, if even that, and overmelding is something only the most dedicated optimizers bother with at all. But once you already have all of the materia you need and your gear is maxed out for a raid tier, all of the materia you generate through spirit bonding just goes on the pile. Not to mention all of the cracked clusters you can accumulate over the course of 8 months. So, the majority of players that bother with materia at all typically have what they need for the first few weeks of a major patch or raid tier, completely avoiding this sale entirely. For crafters, being fully overmelded is a much more crucial part of the game. However, once you are fully overmelded, you of course continue to craft with your now maxed out crafting speed and power, thus producing more materia either to hoard for yourself or to sell. Gatherers are almost worse, because a large portion of the gatherers won't actually need to melt their gear in the first place, so they could just rely on their own production of materia to supply themselves and completely circumvent the market entirely. What I'm trying to say is that the demand for materia on patch day, or patch week even, is highly exaggerated, and you choosing to hoard and buy in bulk from the market is more likely to benefit those that just so happen to be selling materia at that time, more than it benefits you. The second issue with materia hoarding is that it is a strategy I have heard suggested enough times that it is fair to say that most players know about it as a money-making strategy. This means that on patch day, this is likely to be one of the most contested strategies, and if you bought materia to resell, your ability to undercut competition is severely weakened if you want to make a profit. You also need to get rid of your stash quickly before the window to sell at this markup closes, otherwise you will have to wait until the next major patch, raid tier, which is months from now. And in the case of raid tier, this time, the next raid tier will use different materia in the next expansion, so good luck selling those grade 9s and 10s then. Number 2. Tomestone to cash. With the release of a new raid tier, new crafted gear sets are always released. This gear requires materials purchased for the farmable tomestones, and if you came into the patch with maxed out farmable tomestones and weekly tomestones, you will have at least 2,500 tomestones of causality to buy materials with. Now, all you have to do is check the market for which material is most expensive and buy a bunch of that, or maybe buy a bit of everything to diversify. Now, there is actually nothing wrong with this strategy. The crafters will be buying this material in vast quantities to make the new crafts, and they will be making lots of items with it. Furthermore, everyone will enter the new patch with at most 2,500 tomestones of causality on hand, and it is very tedious to farm more quickly intentionally. However, the problem with selling these is rooted entirely in undercutting. While the Materia strategy requires the sellers to both choose to participate and in some capacity have prepared materia in the first place, this strategy is something everyone that has completed the MSQ can participate in. Whether you have 20, 500 or 2500 tomestones of causality, you can throw your hat in the ring. This means that you may be required to be watching the market like a hawk to make sure your materials are the cheapest at all times, lest you risk yours not selling before the price drops to a more reasonable amount. A positive side to this is that because the tomestones of causality are tedious to farm and there are several materials to choose from, most of them tend to stay at a reasonably decent price tag for the entire raid tier. Number 3. Gathering the new materials yourself to sell onto the market. Rather than split your attention and try to both gather and craft at the same time, focus on just one aspect and make bank from that. Requiring a gatherer leveled and at least somewhat geared to be competitive makes this strategy have a higher bar to entry. However, the AFK ability of this strategy can make the competition deceivingly huge. So actually selling your materials can become problematic, especially since, when you're out gathering, you're not in town to undercut the competition. Naturally, most of your competition will also face this problem, but given the bulk of materials the crafters will need, what matters is not the correct quantity to sell, but usually only the price. So whoever happens to be cheapest when a buyer comes around will be the one that sells. This strategy can, as a side bonus, be combined with the Materia Hoarding strategy, since gathering these new materials will produce you more materia. Number 4. Crafting the new gear yourself to sell onto the market. A far scarier prospect than gathering the materials yourself, as the price you end up purchasing the materials at will dictate how much you need to sell for to make a profit. And because of how fast the prices fluctuate in the first few days of a patch, it can be extremely difficult to determine whether it is worth it to buy the materials at the crazy markup, and you will be able to sell your crafts at their equivalent markup before both prices drop. An advantage to this strategy is that if your crafting macros are up to date, you can craft these items while simultaneously checking the market for what to sell next. Or you can watch TV, or more of my videos, or something else. It is even more AFK-able than the gathering option. Additionally, there is much less competition due to the extremely high cost of this strategy, both in terms of materia melting, but also because you need a lot of money in the bank to buy the materials first before selling. On the other hand, the competitions you do get tend to be extremely active Marketboard masters that know all the secret tricks of manipulating the market. And then there's also those that just like to press the funny macro button and AFK, and hopefully make a profit, of course.
Hehe, I just like to watch my character craft. Hammer go bonk bonk.
The scariest part about this strategy is that not only is the window to sell the gear at a high markup surprisingly short, but the buyers may be very few given that the Savage Raid comes out a week later, meaning that the speedrunners don't need your gear day 1, or 2, or 3. They can wait until the price becomes more reasonable. Combine this with the fact that the vast majority of players will only ever need 1 of each gear piece, so as time passes, the demand will only decrease. Number 5. Craft Consumables. With a new raid tier, a new set of consumables will also be released. Sometimes a new craft or draft and food might also release, as the Savage Raiders will need a steady supply of tinctures and food for every raid night from day 1 of the Savage Raid tier till they get their fill. That means it is always safe to craft. However, as you don't need the newest, freshest, bestest food buff or tinctures at all for the normal content leading up to the Savage Raid week, it might be very difficult to sell for a heavy markup in patch week, and that gives a lot of time for the competition to stockpile tinctures and food to sell on Savage Raid patch day, for example, or for the Savage Raiders to stockpile food at a more reasonable price leading up to the Savage Raids. Remember, the bigger the competition, the more often you will have to check the market to make sure you haven't been undercut, and simultaneously, the more competition, the faster the price will drop. Once again, both this strategy and crafting gear can also be combined with the Materia Hoarding strategy, assuming you don't need the materia yourself. Now, just to reiterate, the key problems with each of the 5 strategies are that all 5 strategies are commonly known enough that you will have fierce competition on the market. Additionally, the more easily approachable the strategy is, the more likely it is that the competition is greater. Materia Hoarding has basically no entry requirement. Tomestones have a small preparation requirement and is tedious. Gathering has some entry requirement, and crafting has a high entry requirement, but is also heavily populated by players that play the markets in the first place. So, smaller competition, but really tough competition. The problem is that to make bank from these strategies, you practically have to be performing the strategy, selling your items on the market, and simultaneously be watching the market and refreshing it constantly to undercut the competition. And if as much as one person is undercutting as quickly as you are, then the price of the items you are selling are going to drop incredibly fast, or you will have to let them win. Watching this video, you might be thinking, alright, great, so what you're saying is that these strategies don't really work because everyone uses these strategies, so what should I do instead? The common advice is to find a niche that has little to no competition, but that tends to require you to find it yourself. If a video explains it, it is no longer a niche or a secret. On the other hand, maybe me making this video will convince so many people to not bother with these 5 strategies that they circle back around and become incredibly easy money-making strategies because most of the competition left. Doubt it, but hey, that is also a strategy, to assume everyone else left the battlefield, giving you free reign. And remember, when and if you find a niche, make sure to never tell others about it, because the more people that know the niche, the less profitable it becomes. For example, I paid for my large house with a large majority of money made specifically from selling one specific item and mass crafting it. Millions and millions of gil over time, by simply logging in, crafting a simple item for about 5 minutes, tossing them on the market board and logging out, or doing something else. The niche being less known means less people will undercut you, so you don't have to watch it as closely, and the price stays more stable too. If the item seems complicated to make at a glance, it can also deter new competition from entering the market, since they will choose an easier niche instead. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to support me and my channel, you can make sure to let the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. And if you want to give even more support than that, you can also become a member of the channel like these wonderful people here. Fun fact, the 5% tax rate when buying items from the Marketboard is a fixed price everyone has to pay. But the tax rate of the seller actually depends on where your retainer is situated. This can, for example, mean that if you move your retainer to Old Charlian at a specific time where they have reduced tax rates, you only pay 3% tax rate from your sales. It might not sound like much, but it adds up quickly. I actually explain this and much more in this guide all about retainers if you're interested in learning more.